Now in this set of videos I'm going to talk about science in Australia and in particular issues about science funding and support of science. I mean, if you're going to be some future leader, one of your jobs will be to decide, do you actually support science? Do you give out grants and pay for things, and how do you do it? And this is what you need to know. I'm going to focus on Australia because I know it best, but many of the lessons here are applicable to a wide variety of countries, particularly developed countries. Now, if you believe supporters of Australian science, Australia is actually doing very well in science. Now, Australia has 0.3% of the world's population and 1.6% of the world's economy. So Australia is, by people, a very small part of the world economy. However, Australians publish 4% of the world's published research, and we have 7% of the world's top-ranked universities, including this one. So that sounds pretty good, right? Well, there are certainly some fields of research where Australia, we always call it, punches above its weight, so it does better than you'd expect given the size of its economy and the size of its population. This is the relative impact of scientific publications by research field. So impact normally is the number of citations on all the papers published in the field, divided by the number of researchers. And you can see there are most scientific fields Australia does better than you'd expect, and some, computer science, space science, physics is up here, engineering, these are very highly ranked by world standards. Space science is mostly astronomy, which I'm very happy with, and physics is up there as well as something where Australia does very well in terms of scientific impact as defined by citations, publications and so on. However, all is not necessarily very well. Yes, we get lots of publications and we've got prestigious universities, but how does that actually turn to real benefits for the country? And in fact, Australia's research spending, which is 1.68% of the gross domestic product of the country, is actually pretty low for economically developed countries. It's about average around the world as a whole, but we don't really want to be competing against African countries, very poor countries. So here we've got the total research and development spending, with US top, then China, Japan, Germany and so on, and Australia is pretty tiny, as you'd expect given the small population, but the red dots here are the fraction of the gross domestic product of these countries that's spent on research and development. So that's factoring out the different populations. You'd expect Australia with a population of 27 million to spend less than China with a population of 1.4 billion. What you can see is that like the US spends a bit over 3% of its gross domestic product on research and development, whereas on the average OECD, that should be country, that's economically developed country, spends 2.71%, and Australia it's 1.68% and falling quite fast. So as a fraction of our economy, we're spending actually rather little on research and development compared to most of the developed countries. Compare it with South Korea. I think Israel actually has the highest ratio of any country in the world, but places like South Korea, Taiwan, the US, Japan and Germany are all way higher as a fraction of their economy expenditure on research and development. So what's going on here? Well, Australia does well in terms of scientific publications, but not spending very much money. Well, here is where Australian spending on research and development, such as it is actually spent. So it's slightly more than 50% comes from business. Compare that to the USA, where it's 75% business. So we've got relatively less expenditure from business. The government's not very big. A large bulk is the universities. So basically this is universities using the money they get from their students, primarily international students, and reinvesting that money in research. And then you've got non-profits like charity-funded cancer institutes and things like that. And you can look at the trends in these. So what you can see is that government expenditure on research and development peaked in the mid-1990s at about 0.75% and has dropped substantially since then and seems to be on a general downward decline. as a fraction of gross domestic product. The actual expenditure has remained fairly constant. It's just the economy and the size of Australia has grown, and the spending on research and development by governments has not grown. If you look at business, it's a rather complicated story. It's had a big peak in the about 2010, 2014, and then has fallen off a cliff since then and dropped very much. And that's mostly due to a decline in research and development in mining. One field where Australia was a world leader was spending on high technology mining operations like robotic mines and robotic trains and all these sort of things. And that was spent very heavily when all the huge mines were being built. But now they have been built and they're just busy churning out stuff. The research and development expenditure has dropped off. So that's probably because Australia went through a huge boom of building new mines, and that boom has gone away. And here we've got a graph showing Australia's expenditure on R&D. The dark line is Australia as a whole, and the light brown is Australia excluding the mining industry, compared to the average of OECD, so other economically developed countries. And you can see we've been below the average pretty much as far back as the data goes. There was a brief period around 2008 to 2011 where, mostly due to mining, research and development, we just about got up to the average of a developed country. And since then, other developed countries have been ramping up their spending on research and development, and ours has been falling.